We're talking about olive oil today, extra virgin olive oil, and how you use it. And especially, we're trying to keep the focus plant forward um, for this project. So you told me in an email that you're planting your own olive trees now, and as you did in the past, you plan to make your own olive oil. Why is that important to you? I know it's a big effort and big expense and a long-term project. So why are you doing that?
Yeah, our original farm, which is a 5-acre farm that my wife ran, which is the original SingleThread Farms that we actually leased. It was part of a 180-acre vineyard parcel. We inherited there 100 olive trees. So we started making our olive oil from a variety of different olives that were just already on the property. So for the first few years at SingleThread, we actually made our own olive oil and used it. And pretty much what we made in the December got us through a good portion of the year. And we split that with the winemaker and the vineyards that were there. And so we bought a 24-acre farm at the end of 2021. And we're now in the process of really developing that farm. And so a big part of that is to add olive trees to that to continue to do our own olive production. I mean, we live in Sonoma County. We have stone mills and hammer mills all around us. In fact, less than a 3-minute drive from us is a mill that we can use. So it's pretty typical up here in wine country for a lot of winery properties and other farms to make their own olive oil. And it also gives us the opportunity to create something with a flavor profile that we're really looking for. And it's another way for us to do it ourselves. I mean, a big part of what we do here at SingleThread is we grow. We do support a lot of other farms, but we grow 70% or more of our own produce and floral. And olive oil is just an extension of that.
How important would you say it is to the quality or the flavor or of what you're preparing?
Yeah, I mean, quality obviously is incredibly important. The one thing about creating our own olive oil is we do have the ability to maintain quality and like that provenance as well, that we know how it's been stored at all times throughout the process. So we're able to really, control the quality. It is a high cost in there of maintaining and harvesting and milling, but we're also able to also have the benefit of the bulk production, and we can cut down on packaging and glass because we don't need to buy so much packaging, which is really important to us as well as a way to reduce packaging. We can really create a flavor profile that we're interested, that works in particular for our cuisine. So, flavor and quality is so important by really looking at the cuisine of a restaurant or a chef, or even down to individual dishes, because there is such a broad range. I mean, I think sometimes people think maybe good olive oil is good olive oil, but just like good wine, there's a lot of great wine out there, but it does come down to personal preference or what's the right wine for the dish or the meal. It's very often that way, and we don't maybe necessarily think of olive oil in those same terms, but it's what's the most appropriate for this particular dish.
Yeah, I know chefs, restaurant owners, they understand the need for a diverse wine list, and they spend a lot of time choosing what wines to offer. How do we get them to pay as much attention to olive oil and to showcase the diversity of styles?
Yeah, I think we're very used to in restaurants and with chefs and just in food people in general to really thinking about the depth and breadth of wine that is out there in choosing and selecting the right wines for our taste preferences, as well as what's going to go most appropriately with the dish or a meal. And how could we be looking at that a little bit more, for olive oil? And that's really about people becoming more educated about individual oils and what they mean and what they mean to a cuisine or to a dish and what the profile is. So, money or price is not the only guiding factor to say, well, this is a more expensive olive oil, therefore a better olive oil. Just like with wine, right? There is great wine at all different price points. It all comes down to what it is that you're looking for. So, understanding the different, regions, some flavors that may come inherently with those regions. Flavors that come in inherently with the variety, of olives, and then in the style of the olive oil made. And you can make direct translations on all of those things I just said. To wine, we're used to region, varietal, and method, and so it's really about becoming a little bit more educated as how those same things pertain to olive oil.
Can you give some examples, preferably plant-forward ones, of how you think about matching oils to a dish?
Yeah, we really think about matching oils with the dish by looking at what sort of profile we want. Do we want something very peppery and spicy and forward, and you're getting a little bite, a little bit of astringency? And maybe because the dish that we have has elements that are a little bit more soft, and we're looking for the olive oil to bring in that pepperiness or that bite. Or do we have flavors that are really, maybe have a little bit more bitterness to them, a little bit more bitter greens, or if you think about a salad with chicories where you're already getting a lot of that, or arugula, you're getting a lot of that pepperiness. Do we need to further enhance that with olive oil, or can we bring in something more floral and fruity? So, that's how we're sort of looking at, these types of dishes, and also temperature, I think, plays a big role. It's like, is this a salad that we're dressing? If so, what are those greens, like I said? Or is there fruit in this salad? Is there something more tomatoey in this salad? What types of flavors across the spectrum of sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami are we trying to support in there and enhance? And in doing that in a cold, more raw way. And now on the other end of the spectrum, are we cooking in the olive oil? Are we actually cooking and sauteing in that? Are we drizzling that onto something warm where you're going to get the more aromatic qualities? That's very typical for us, to finish vegetable, dishes with olive oil on the top, where you're getting it sort of like perfumed into the steam and the overall sort of aromatic quality, of the dish. Or are we actually going so far as to say, like, we are kind of frying in this oil, and we're going to be more deep saute, and you're going to be picking up those flavors, into the vegetables of that, or grilling, and what flavors are going to, come through there, or something that's, maybe a little bit more sort of, ambiguous about making something that's like an emulsion, like an aioli or something like that. What sort of profile do we want that, to come across? What's the strength and the characteristic of the olive oil?
Is it as simple as saying that if you're going for more robust flavors in a dish, say you're grilling your vegetables, would you want a more pungent oil for that? If you're doing the salad with the fruit, would you want a fruitier olive oil?
I think the characteristics present themselves the most in these types of situations where we have something cold and dressed in a sort of salad type application, or a sauce that may be dressed in there, where olive oil and herbs, which is very typical for us, is to combine, sauces that are very olive oil heavy with different herbs and spices to them, or to the other end of the spectrum, where we may be doing a very, very high temperature cooking, where it's more of a shallow fry, more of a saute, where you need to look for characteristics in the olive oil that are going to support these higher temperatures of cooking. So if you're using something that's very, very delicate and fruity, you're probably going to be losing a lot of those amazing aromatic qualities. And so you might be, looking for something that is maybe a little bit more neutral in that case. We are often incorporating olive oil into dishes too that are warm dishes finished with olive oil, especially at our more plant-based restaurant, or our completely plant-based restaurant, which is called Little Saint. A lot of those dishes, and a big part of that is because we're not using animal fats, and you're not getting richness of butter or, natural inherent duck fat, or, marbling of things. So a lot of what we're doing is not only supporting sort of aromatic flavor profiles by drizzling olive oil onto warm dishes. But also in terms of mouthfeel and the sort of overall fat of the dish, because we're dealing with all plant-based things. We want to bring in richness that would be there maybe in more sort of savory, meaty dishes.
Talk a little bit more about the additional role that olive oil plays when you're cooking entirely with plants.
Yeah, well, when you're cooking entirely plant-based menus, as we are all the time at Little Saint, because we are a completely plant-based restaurant there, and oftentimes a single thread, because in our menu, well, first of all, about 10 to 15% of our guests are vegetarian or vegan. So we're doing 10-course vegetarian and vegan meals. And also we're doing completely plant-based dishes within our regular omnivore menu as well. So we're thinking about that, quite a bit. So flavor is a big part of where the olive oil is, plays a role. But I think it's important also to really, to talk about the role that just the fat itself is playing. So, when you're cooking meat and seafood dishes, you have a lot of inherent fat that is coming with that. So, from the skin of a duck breast, from the marbling in the steak, whatever it may be, or just the richness of fish like black cod or, tuna belly, right? You have a lot of inherent sort of fat and richness. So, while there are some fats present in plant form, oftentimes when we're thinking about the profile of the dish, not just from the flavor standpoint, but also from the textural standpoint and how fat carries aromatic, flavor. So the solubility of flavor, within fat. But from a textural point of view, from a mouthfeel, when we are trying to lead people into a more plant-based diet, a big part of what they may be craving in terms of, where meat historically would have been, or animal protein would have historically been. So much of that is a textural experience. And a lot of what makes up that textural experience is like how the fat expresses in there. So olive oil for us is such a tool in doing that, where you are getting a depth of flavor that is coming with the mouthfeel and the coating and the textural elements of the fat. So, neutral fats, where we use a lot of grapeseed oil as well, but that's really like the medium, for cooking, or solely just to give you, mouthfeel in a particular dish, is not really bringing anything to the party, flavor wise. Sesame oil, because we have a more sort of Japanese based, flavor profile, is also a fantastic tool that we use all the time, but is very, very specific. And will, through a spectrum of different sesame oils, will give you a very, very specific, sort of flavor profile that can sort of inherently begin to take over, the flavors of the dish. What is great about olive oil is sort of the best of both worlds, where there is an sort of inherent neutrality, to it, but there's a sort of incredible viscosity to, and it's bringing flavor in a way that tends to be supportive of other flavors sort of across the board, where some other oils like sesame oil or avocado oil or some of these things are not. They're very, very specific.
Do you use olive oil in the pastry kitchen on the sweet side? So
yes.
Do you have anything to say about the different style, where, how you choose what style of olive oil you're going to use in pastry applications?
Yeah, the olive oil plays a really strong role in our pastry kitchen, as well as it does into our savory cuisine. We are really big fans of, things going from the sort of top of the presenting it in the most sort of like forward way, which would be something like an olive oil ice cream, olive oil sorbet, types of things. We also do a lot of olive oil based cakes. I love the way that olive oil expresses itself into something that's more of a cake base. And I like to remove, animal fats such as butter. And I think olive oil sort of like expresses in a way that's just much more flavorful and has a much more clean sort of like mouthfeel to it. And it sort of for me, alleviates a little bit of the perception of heaviness. And so there's a sort of more of a lightness that comes with that. And I worked for chefs early on in my career, most notably Suzanne Goyen, who was olive oil cake was a big part of the pastry, program that she had at Luke and AOC when I worked for her in the late 90s. And I really kind of fell in love with that and have just been exploring it ever since, this idea of olive oil in desserts. But so that's kind of like the heavier end of the spectrum. And on the more lighter end of the spectrum, we actually drizzle a lot of olive oil into our desserts. Our desserts at SingleThread and at Little Saint, we tend not to play up the sweet, ultra sweet desserts. We're not seeing sort of chocolatey dishes and desserts and more rich, these sort of like very, very sweet and decadent. We are exploring more of where sweet and savory mix. Right now, our main dessert that we have is like a frozen carrot marshmallow. It's a carrot marshmallow that we make that we turn into actually something like a texture like an ice cream. So we don't have the animal fats in that coming from the cream and from the egg yolk rather. And that's with a sort of a carrot cake of sorts in a sauce that's made from Myrhvold. So that is, and with smoky carrots. So, here we're sort of like taking a vegetable that people perceive as mostly in savory aspects, but has a lot of natural sugar to it. And we're exploring the sweet side of what a carrot can be. And that's pretty, typical. We also have a dessert of tomato and strawberry and black sesame with olive oil. That also kind of blurs the line between our perception of sweet and savory with the strawberry and the tomato. So we do a more savory treatment to the strawberry and a more sweet treatment to the tomato. These two fruits are actually very, very closely related, more closely related than people sort of realize. In particular in their sort of chemical makeup and flavor profile. And we play with that idea of sweet and savory. And a big way that we sort of bridge this thing between sweet and savory is olive oil is a tie that we often bring into. So both of those desserts that I just described get sort of drizzled in olive oil. We were recently in Japan cooking 3 nights of dinners with a restaurant in Japan. And we brought olive oil with us from California, and we were adding that to the dessert. And that was sort of like blowing their mind that we were bringing, olive oil into a sweet preparation. But it's very, very typical, for us. And I think we're a California restaurant. So I think there's something too that just sort of expresses a certain California sort of feel to it through there. It's certainly not limited to California, but I think it's just sort of, it does have a tendency to support our overall flavor profile.
When you talk about these desserts, like the tomato strawberry fruit-based dessert, what style of olive oil works best in that type of dessert versus, say, the carrot cake or the ice cream?
Yeah. So I think the style of olive oil for our pastry applications tends to be a lighter, more fruitier style. I think we do shy away from the more sort of peppery or sort of astringency of the oil because that can sort of bring bitterness maybe where it doesn't necessarily need to be. So in the sweet applications, we tend to lean to, as I said, lighter, more sort of fruitier styles.
Just a couple of more questions. One has to do with those more bitter, more pungent oils, which a lot of consumers seem to shy away from. They think they don't like pungent oil. What advice do you have for chefs in how to introduce people to the flavors of these more pungent oils, bitter oils?
Yeah, I think maybe for some diners, taste or home cooks is like tasting some of the oils that have more pungency to them, can be a little bit more spicy. They have that pepperiness that sort of gets you in the back of the throat, that kind of when you take a spoonful of it kind of makes you pause for a second, and then maybe think that they should shy away from using those because they're a little bit more strong in nature. But like anything, or looking at wine, you wouldn't necessarily open up a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon or Syrah, to have with a raw fish dish or salad or something like that, right? So, they have their place, and so that's really about like understanding the place. Again, I think there's this one size fits all feeling about, olive oil is something that you would just have a single bottle of and you just sort of use across the board. And certainly olive oil is more flexible than say, wine is, of looking at a Riesling versus a Cabernet Sauvignon, right? There's a lot of distance between those things where the world of olive oil is maybe a little bit closer, together. But also it's thinking about the context. If you add an olive oil tasting and you have, a spoonful, or you dip, bread and it soaks it in, you just take that and you say, well, that's too strong. It may be seem a little bit strong out of context without anything else, but those flavors specifically can really, highlight and sort of really become beautiful and bring out properties of other ingredients. It's just sort of knowing where and when to use them.
Any final do's and don'ts for chefs who are interested in exploring this bigger range of olive oil styles? Anything they should or shouldn't do as they experiment?
I think chefs and home cooks, alike, is really, to really use olive oil. I think sometimes people maybe want to use it very, very sparingly. And it's actually great to explore using it in a little bit more abundance and to see really the flavors that are, are there, and using olive oil through the cooking of a dish and then in the finishing. That's something I don't see as much outside of, certain professional kitchens, is this idea of just the olive oil to finish. It's where you may have cooked a dish within the olive oil. Let's say you're going to drizzle onto vegetables, grill those, and serve, those simply. But it's like after the grilling is just like to do a little bit a drizzle to finish. So you get the sort of cooked flavors and some of the kind of reactive flavors that happen, we call reactive flavors. So, taking something, fat plus whatever it is and introducing heat is going to give you flavors that we call reactive, reacting to the heat, reacting to the cooking process, and then actually being able to enjoy a little bit of that sort of straightforward, the more of the perfume and the sort of natural, some unadulterated, flavor profile that's in, the olive oil. So, I really, it's sort of advice is to use those that are more like really bring those to, if you're going to do, a salad, or you're going to do tomatoes, make that very olive oil vinegar and really dress it, with that. So that you can really get the flavor of the olive oil to both enjoy on its own and sort of enhance. And I think maybe it has a little bit to do with cost, or maybe just people wanting to be light-handed. On the other hand, we don't want to overdress things, but using olive oil to finish things, especially cooked, dishes, is such a really pleasurable way. And you get onto that warm food, you get that sort of aromatic quality that comes to the table, and that's the sort of multi-sensory aspect of it. This sort of aromatic quality that I really, sort of advise. And then really exploring, the olive oils. I know it's a little bit daunting. You can go, let's say you're at a good grocer and you're looking across the spectrum of different olive oils, and you're seeing different locations and different price points and very different types of, bottles and cans and things that it's coming on. It's hard to make a decision without a lot of, with a lot of knowledge. Just like if you didn't have very much knowledge on wine and you're looking at a wine shop, right, it can be very, very intimidating to say like, well, what do I do? I see so many prices and so many different things, what should I do? And that's really just a little bit of that is having fun with an exploration of let's try this and then let's try that, or let's get some things, try it side by side, and take the time when you get a new olive oil to open it up, pour some in a dish, taste it on its own. I think oftentimes we just put it on the shelf and then we just use it and we don't actually, taste it and develop a sort of sense memory with that particular olive oil, and let that guide what our preference are, is to say, you know what, I like that, but I think maybe it was a little bit too much of this for my taste, or this. So next time I'll explore something different, and let's compare and contrast and really find what you like, either in a more broad sense or what you like for individual applications.